Hello and welcome to the University of Worcester Study Skills Podcast. And today's episode we're going to be talking about reading and note-taking. From Library Services, I'm Kate Courage.
And Ros Sykes.
And we're joined by colleagues from Centre for Academic English and Skills.
Kieran Dan.
Christina Wright. Ruth Edge.
Okay.
So I guess the first question when it comes to reading is, what should we be reading?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one thing that's really key for everyone to realise is that your tutors will have put a huge amount of time into creating your resource list, so what we call reading lists. So in your resource list there will be all the really, really key texts that they know will give you a good overview of the topics that you've been covering in class. So I think sometimes students can feel under pressure to find new and original things to read, and I think it's important not to feel that pressure and actually, to feel it's absolutely fine and a really, really good idea to just start with those really key texts that your tutors have they're recommending. That's where they want you to start.
So start with the core text, the essential reading on your reading list first, and then maybe move into exploring some of your own ideas after that, or exploring some of the extended reading on the resource list after that.
Yeah.
If you have a resource list, I guess if you're doing a dissertation, you might have to find all of your own reading because it will be your own subject.
Can I ask, if you're exploring your own resources, you've looked at all the core texts, is it important that it's an academic text if you're sort of exploring your own ideas, peer-reviewed text?
I think there will come a point where it is, but perhaps depends on where you are with that reading process. So if you're new to a topic and you're struggling to understand it, perhaps starting with a sort of lower level text is okay. So a sort of very basic textbook, maybe even something aimed at a more sort of public or school level audience would be okay to help you to understand it.
General background and context.
Yeah.
And there are lots of public or lots of good websites aimed at the public that can be really good starting points, but that you want to move on from that and you wouldn't want to put some of that very general stuff in your reference list. They're just to help you build up an understanding of the vocabulary that will enable you to read the more academic tests and the concepts as well. So it is often, most of us probably, when we're looking at a topic that's new to us, start with reading something that's fairly general and basic. And not an academic. We don't generally jump in with the most academic stuff first.
I'm often asked about, can I use Wikipedia? And I suppose at a very basic level to start off.
And identify those key concepts and identify the key vocabulary as well that helps you then read and find the more relevant sources.
I suppose the most important thing is that you do get to those academic texts, and that those are the ones that form the basis of your reading and the work that you actually cite and reference in your assignments.
So you can, even once you've gone to your academic textbooks and your academic journal articles, you might still want to use web sources, and there can be some good web sources out there, can't there? It's just really important to be critical about them and to think, where did the evidence for this come from? And if you can find that original evidence, to go on and find it. To think about, how is this web source affecting me emotionally, and recognising that if you do have a positive or a negative emotional response to it, that you need to be a lot more careful with your evaluation. And looking to see what are other sources saying as well. Are they, is this agreeing with concepts in other sources? And if it is, can you find the evidence for those? Just it pointing you in the direction of further evidence. And thinking about who that site is aimed at. So sometimes you might find sites that are aimed for public audiences, but really for your academic work you want professional or academic audiences. So you just have to be critical, but that doesn't mean that there aren't really useful sources out there. And certainly things like government statistics, ONS statistics, are really high quality evidence that are great to use in assignments if you can find relevant ones.
And I guess as well as who the website is aimed at, there's obviously who's written it as well. So who, on what authority does that person have on that topic.
Do they know anything about it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Do they know
They may
anything
not.
about it? And again, where is that evidence? So yes, and is it up to date? Is it the most current version?
Yeah, and I think along with that, is there any bias in that information?
Are they trying to sell you something?
Exactly.
So be critical about, I suppose what you select outside of the reading list.
And I suppose if we're saying that starting with relatively basic sources to make sure you've understood the topic is fine and is a good idea. In terms of the more academic sources, we would say that starting with books is often a good idea.
Yes, so books are good, aren't they, for helping you to find a range of different theoretical perspectives and to get with grips with what people have thought about that subject overall in the past. So you can get a good overview of a topic, and then from there that allows you to take a deeper dive into the academic research.
Yes, because books are generally written, aren't they, to give that kind of a big picture, introduce a topic in a very kind of holistic sense, whereas if you go to a journal article, that is somebody's quite in-depth research, often on a very niche topic. So if you were to start there, you could find yourself heading down a very strange sort of rabbit hole on a very, very specific aspect of that topic, rather than having the bigger picture and an understanding of it as a whole.
This is beginning to sound like it's quite a lot of reading that we have to do. Are there any techniques or strategies that are available to make sure that we're making the most of our reading time?
It's really important for us that you say that there's a lot of reading that needs to be done, but of course we've got limited time. Students have limited time, so you have to manage your time through the research process as you do with anything else. So yes, you're reading, but the strategies and the techniques come into the fact that you've got to make decisions when you're reading. Is this valuable to me? If you're reading an article, is it valuable to me? You can make that judgment quite early on through reading of that article. If it's not, don't be afraid just to leave it and then move on to something else. And that's where things like skimming and scanning can also help, because skimming, you're reading very quickly, but part of that is just reading the opening parts, the opening paragraph, maybe the first lines of the remainder of the paragraphs of the article, and making the judgment as to whether that's actually leading you into a helpful direction. When you're scanning, you're looking for specific key points within the text. You're looking very, very quickly through that and just trying to find, it could be names, useful names, it could be useful theories, it could be statistics that you're trying to find. And if you don't see those in the article, again, possibly leave it. So we've got to manage your time within this reading process, because you're limited in that, and that's a skill in itself.
And always read the abstracts if you go through
Yes, if
journals.
there's nothing useful in an abstract for a journal article, there will be nothing useful in the article. So that's a really good tip. And with books as well, contents pages, blurbs, indexes are all really helpful. And these days, of course, quick search on Google Books will often help you focus in on the relevant part of the book that you then read the ebook or the print book for, so that can be helpful too.
Always look at the drawbacks of potential drawbacks of them as well. So yes, books, very useful, but of course it's about when it was written. So that's the drawback of a lot of books, of course, is that they're published in the past. How long ago in the past? Is it still relevant? Can I be using that statistic? Obviously, online articles are much more up to date, but how were they written? What was the, if it was based upon research, how was the research conducted? And you make that critical decision according to the material that you're reading.
That's right, and there are types of information that you won't find in a research article, because you're looking for, if you're looking for an established procedure, that those established procedures are going to have been drawn from research over a number of years, so you're not going to find one research article that deals with that, unless there's something useful, like in NICing, there might be a NICE guideline, but quite often established procedures are going to be in things like textbooks, and they're your starting point, aren't they, for that kind of information.
I think what you said about books, actually, Kieran, make sure you've got the latest edition, I think, a textbook.
Yeah. So if all this reading is feeling really overwhelming, either because I'm really time poor and I'm very busy, or because I just hate reading. Is there anything I can do?
Well, I mean, there are various tools that you can use if the physical act of reading is challenging for any number of reasons. We have a resource list specifically that lists all kinds of tools you can use to help you with your reading. We'll link that in the description for the podcast. Things, for example, that will text to speech, so you can listen to a book rather than having to read it. Tools that will help you to sort of focus where you're looking at on the page so that you're not getting distracted. Lots of ways in which you can make the act of reading itself an easier one.
Yeah, that sounds great. And if you have a reading disability, a print disability, so that you can't read, or it's difficult to read because of something like dyslexia or ADHD or autism or a physical impairment or a visual impairment, you might want to investigate Bookshare as well.
RNIB Bookshare, absolutely, really, really good, really useful tool and free to use.
Okay, brilliant.
So thinking then about strategies to make the reading as effective as possible, which certainly brings in, I think, the idea of note-taking, doesn't it? What are the best ways of making sure, do we think, that you're reading actively and purposefully?
I think, first of all, with note-taking, it's subjective. There's no right or wrong way. You've got to make it work for you. I think one of my favourite note-taking tips is to, we always say, whether you're note-taking in a lecture, whether you're note-taking from books, journals, your own reading, make sure you revisit what you write as soon as possible. So make your notes and then revisit. We say, try to within about 24 hours so that, you embed the information. And when you revisit it, you can summarise, colour code, underline, again, make it work for you, but make sure that the information is, assimilated. And also, I think the key word active note-taking was really good. Try and be, a critical note-taker. So when you read, question what you read, engage with what you read. Ask yourself, how is this relevant for me? Is this a convincing argument? Oh, is this making me change my mind? So don't just accept. Okay, so that's another tip. Be a critical note taker, an active note taker, rather than just noting down. Think about what you're noting down.
So, does everybody need to make notes? I know students sometimes say to me, "Well, I've printed all my articles out and highlighted them, so I don't need to make notes, or I've got 30 tabs open on my computer, so I can just swap between my sources." Is it important for everybody to make notes, or actually can you go directly from the original sources?
I was just going to say, I think you need to then have a bridge between that, all those different pages, and your assignment. So that's where you might use, you might condense your notes into like a mind map or a chart, a flow chart. That doesn't work for everybody.
Yes, so I think there is a process, definitely, from the reading that you do into the note-taking and trying to be organised with your writing. So if you have lots of tabs open, like Chris says, you need that bridge of note-taking to help you to organise your thoughts, to help you to be critical about actually what you're reading in the context of then moving forward towards writing for your assignment.
I think about, if you think about, importance of good academic integrity, I feel like that note-taking process is really key for you as the person creating the work to make it clear to yourself what you've taken from your reading and what's your own ideas, so making that clear as you make notes. It also means if you ever were to be asked in a work review meeting, or academic integrity meeting, how you came about the ideas and the work, it's all documented. So it doesn't have to be kind of, beautifully documented or lovely note making, but just evidence that you've read, that you've made notes, that it's really clear where you got your ideas from and which bits were yours. So flagging your own ideas in your notes think feels like a really good idea too.
That does seem like a really good idea, and also making sure that you've got at least your in-text citation, so you know which source you got them from. Maybe popping your page numbers down in the margin or on the right-hand side margin or somewhere. So page numbers, even if you're not using a direct quote, so page numbers for all of your notes, so you can easily go back yourself and track back and decide that. And there is some value, isn't there, in just paraphrasing into your notes in the first place to help you develop your own understanding. So if you're confident that you understand the text yourself, it's easier to work out how you can use it and how it relates to your assignment question, how it relates to your experience in practice, perhaps.
At some point you need to start to, going back to Chris's point of the bridge, so you've got the original sources, and then this bridging process is developing your understanding and bringing them into your own voice. So if you fully understand these original sources, then you start to take notes on them, and then you start to build on them a little bit further. Perhaps you start to paraphrase some of those ideas because you're going to use them directly in your assignment. In any sort of written essay or any academic text, you want to have a consistent voice throughout. So, and that's all based upon how you write. So note taking is the fundamental part of that, is actually starting to almost transfer this information into your understanding in your own words, representing your own voice. And it's just the beginning part of the process.
And there are different ways, aren't there, to take notes. For example, Ros, you've said about your original kind of maybe a highlighting of text, but then taking that highlighting and note taking can be very, very linear, or you might want to use mind maps or flowcharts, or you might want to be a bit more organised, which is a really good way to take your notes and put them into maybe a whole page with columns on one side, so that you can take your notes in a linear fashion, but then actually write down some critical points or some critical questions in a column to the side, and maybe then revisit it and summarise that information later on, which I think, Chris, you said was just a really good tip, isn't it?
Just help you engage with the material, yeah, and it might sort of lead you to thinking about new things, new ways forward with an assignment. It might even change your mind. So again, it's important to engage with what the notes that you take.
Absolutely, and the active involvement, we've mentioned it a few times, but that's so crucial through this whole process, from reading, note-taking, writing. How many times have we all been in the same situation when you've read something, particularly an academic article, which can be not the most exciting piece of text? How many times have we read a page or even a whole article and afterwards thought, I've no idea what I've just read? Yeah. We don't want to be that passive reader. We don't want to be the passive learner. We need to actively involve ourselves in that. And that will be thinking critically about what you're reading. What does it mean to you? How does that information, how is it represented in your knowledge? And also a real key part of that is taking notes, because you're actively involved in taking this information and formulating it into a different piece of writing. So active involvement is really important from the beginning to the end.
And question and look for links between the different sources that you're using as well. So make a note of that. You might note sources that sort of agree, have similar research areas, or come to similar conclusions, and that will help when you synthesize when you're writing your assignment.
Yeah, the beginning of synthesizing, isn't it? So this is all note taking. Will also represent the plan that you're making. A plan is a series of notes, ultimately, throughout the whole document. They'd be flexible in that. You can change your plan the same way that you can change your notes. So, so all of these different sources that you're bringing, ones that are in favour of certain ideas, ones that are against it, they take notes of all of those, and you eventually you will embed those together, you'll synthesise those together to build your discussion.
At the end of the day, academic writing is a process, not a product, and this is part of the process, the different stages.
I wonder whether, just thinking about the kinds of questions we often starting to get now more from students about how or can generative AI help in this process. I suppose one thought I've had is that generative AI has summarising tools, where you could take an article, run it through a summarising tool to get a summary of that paper, and there's a question perhaps of whether that's a good idea or not. There are tools that will do that without taking that content and putting it into their own database, which makes it a much better idea in terms of copyright and it being ethically okay. So there's a tool, for example, called Claude, which will take an article, summarise it, and not keep the content and feed it into its own database. But I suppose there's a question, isn't there, of how far that will be helpful, and I'm guessing we probably would all agree that if that kind of tool might help you to decide whether or not an article looks relevant, but that crucially it doesn't stop you from needing to read it. So you want to, once you've decided that the article is useful, then read it.
Go and read the detail, make sure that
Yeah.
it's reflected through the whole way, that there aren't things that contradict it. And when we read journal articles, we might, as we said before, skim. We might just look at headings to begin with. But once you've decided that there is relevant content, you've focused on that relevant content, you want to read the whole article to make sure that you're just not taking one little bit out of context. So whether you're doing that using reading techniques and tools, or whether you're using generative AI, it's the same thing. You just want to be really clear that you've read the thing thoroughly, understood it, and then can make use it accurately.
Yeah.
And represent it accurately in your own writing.
So maybe it's more of a tool for quickly discarding the stuff that isn't relevant, but in the same way that we've talked about using abstracts or skimming and scanning to discard things you think actually aren't going to be relevant. It's just another way possibly of doing that.
Yeah.
There are also some online tools for note-taking, like Glean, OneNote, Notability.
Evernote?
Yes, Evernote.
Evernote.
Some people like audio note tools, don't they?
Yeah. Audio Note, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So those are all good to use.
But it's important to reinforce there's not a one-size-fits-all. These are all options, but very, very simple note-taking is also fine. If it works for you, then that's good. Some people like to be very, very careful and precise, take lots of time with this part of the process, but other people just like to do it quite speedily so they can move on to the actual writing part of the essay. And there's nothing wrong with that. If it works for you, then that's okay.
It's very subjective note-taking. There are also in Word, you've got various templates for mind maps, if that works for you at the sort of organisational stage before you start writing.
We have we'll link this in the description as well. We have a resource list of tools for writing, as well as a resource list for tools for reading, and they mention all of these note-taking tools.
Fantastic.